Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The golden chandelier sparkled above Amarachi's head as she stood by the staircase, nervously adjusting the lace around her shoulders. The gown Raymond's tailor forced on her was too tight at the waist and too loud for her quiet spirit, but she wore it anyway, hoping it would make her less invisible. The mansion buzzed with the sounds of laughter, clinking wine glasses, and jazz music. Guests in glittering gowns and imported perfumes floated through the space like royalty. Amarachi barely fit in. Her heart pounded as she stepped toward the hallway leading to the dinner, but Raymond's voice cut through the air like a slap. Aha! Amarachi, is that how you pronounce champagne? Again? Must you embarrass me every time? His voice was loud and intentional. Laughter followed from his guests. Her cheeks burned. She hadn't even made it to the table yet, and already she was the joke of the evening. His mistress, Jessica, who wore a gown that could pay 3 years' rent, walked past her with a smirk, brushing Amarachi's arm as if she were diseased. "Stay in your lane, madam," Jessica muttered with a snide smile before linking arms with Raymond. Amarachi said nothing. She just tightened her lips, swallowed her shame, and turned around to go sit at the back, her daughter's voice echoing in her mind. "Mummy, when will you smile like those women on TV?" To Raymond, Amarachi wasn't a wife. She was a decorative piece, something rustic to remind him of his humble beginnings, though he often twisted the story when recounting it to friends. At business meetings, he called her my village souvenir. At home, he called her his special pity project. In front of their staff, he laughed about how she once said goat instead of vote during a discussion. Amarachi endured it all, not because she was weak, but because she believed dignity could survive even in silence. She often stood by the kitchen door, listening to conversations she was never part of. She wanted to learn how they spoke, how they carried themselves. But even when she practiced English in her room, Raymond mocked her pronunciation. "It's elegance, not elegance," he once shouted with laughter, while Jessica recorded and posted it on her private story. Her existence was comic relief in his world of polished lies. Yet through all the ridicule, Amarachi bore it with grace. Not because she lacked pain, but because she still had something worth protecting. Her daughter, her only joy, her quiet miracle. That night, as the guests took their seats in the luxurious dining hall and jazz music dipped into slow piano notes, Raymond gave a toast. He stood with Jessica beside him and lifted his glass of wine. "To new beginnings," he said, grinning broadly. "And to those of us who moved past the stage of playing with toys." The room laughed. A few turned their eyes to the corner, where Amarachi sat in silence, blinking away tears. She smiled weakly and whispered to herself, "One day, this table will turn. And when it does, it will shake this house." Long before the marble floors, imported wines, and cruel laughter, Amarachi had been the girl who held her family together with calloused hands and hungry prayers. The oldest of 6 children, she became a second mother before she ever became a woman. When her father died, her mother sat for days, staring at the wall like a statue. It was Amarachi who took up the load. At just 10 years old, she carried a tray of roasted plantains on her head under the hot sun, walking from market to market. She dropped out of school after primary 6, not because she wasn't brilliant, but because her siblings needed notebooks. They needed uniforms. They needed sandals. And she made sure they had them, even if it meant selling her own Sunday slippers or skipping meals. They called her Mama Junior. Neighbors praised her for her sacrifices. Her mother often cried while praying, "God, bless this child." Amarachi never complained. She believed love was service. She believed her siblings would always remember her kindness. She believed wrong. As the years passed, her siblings began to rise. One got a scholarship to study nursing. Another started selling gadgets in the city. Her younger brother moved to Europe with help from a family friend. Amarachi, still in the village, sold groundnut and cleaned classrooms to feed her mother. She often called her siblings, excited to hear about their lives. At first, they picked. Then, they stopped. Slowly, Their excuses grew colder. Sis, I'm in a meeting. Network is bad, I'll call you back. Why are you always calling? And then nothing. She'd scroll through Facebook and see them smiling in photos, wearing clothes she'd never afford, celebrating birthdays she was never invited to. She kept trying, kept praying, but the silence grew louder. Her mother's health began to fail, and Amarachi sold the last jewelry she had left, an old bangle given to her by their father, just to buy drugs. She called her siblings again. One read her message and didn't reply. Another blocked her. Amarachi sat by her mother's bedside, weeping quietly into a worn pillow. The small, buzzing phone in Amarachi's hand had become her prayer altar. Every evening, after boiling water for bathing and feeding her mother pap, she would sit by the oil lamp and stare at the screen, waiting. Sometimes she'd type out long texts to her siblings, begging for a few naira for hospital drugs. Other times, it was voice notes filled with sobs, cut short before she could finish her sentence. One by one, the ticks turned blue. One by one, the responses stopped. Her brother, who once clung to her legs in childhood, now said, "I'm not your bank." Her sister, who used to share food with her at night, said, "I have my own family now. Stop guilt-tripping us." Amarachi cried alone. She didn't blame them. She blamed herself for expecting loyalty where only convenience lived. Her mother's breathing became shallow. They had no generator, no transport fare, and no one to help. Amarachi did what she had always done, endure. She carried her mother on her back to the local clinic, but they refused to admit her without payment. She ran to neighbors, begged, pleaded. Some gave a little, others turned their faces. She returned to the clinic with half the amount needed. The nurse refused. "Hospital policy," she said coldly. Amarachi returned home with her mother and placed her on the floor. That night, her mother coughed blood. Amarachi used her wrapper to wipe it. She watched her mother struggle for breath, whispering faintly, "I'm sorry for leaving you like this." Her mother passed away at dawn. Amarachi didn't scream. She didn't shout. She just sat there, staring at the doorway. Her phone rang once. It was her brother. When she picked up and told him Mama had died, he simply said, "Okay. Sorry, things are tight here too." Then silence. Then the beep of disconnection. Amarachi stared at the wall for hours. The only sounds in the room were the buzz of mosquitoes and her mother's body cooling on the mat. After burying her mother in a borrowed coffin, Amarachi walked home alone. She saw her siblings' posts online, filtered selfies, brunch photos, inspirational quotes. Her heart boiled, not with hate, but with resolve. She sat outside the house that night, her feet dusty, her eyes dry. For the first time, she whispered not to God, but to herself. "If this life won't help me, I will help myself. They think I'm nothing because I cannot read, cannot speak well, cannot dress. But I'll teach myself. I will rise from this mud, and I will become the storm they never saw coming." It began with flowers and false promises. Raymond had come into Amarachi's life like a whirlwind. He arrived in the village in a tinted SUV with polished shoes, a smooth accent, and eyes that scanned people like investments. He had organized a charity drive sponsored by his real estate firm, and Amarachi, humble and barefoot, had served water to the volunteers. She barely understood what the cameras were for. All she knew was that he smiled at her differently. That night, while returning her borrowed tray, he asked, "What's your name?" She blushed and said, "Amarachi," adding quickly, "It means grace." He laughed and said, "That's fitting." Days turned into weeks. He returned again and again, each time bringing small gifts, a hair scarf, canned milk, new slippers. Her mother was suspicious, but Amarachi believed God had finally remembered her. When Raymond asked for her hand in marriage, she didn't even pause to consider. She saw him as a ticket out of shame, out of abandonment, out of sleeping on cold floors. She never imagined she was walking into a different kind of prison. From the moment she entered his mansion in Lagos, the tone changed. There were rules she didn't understand, cutlery rules, bedroom rules, silence rules. On their first dinner together, Raymond shook his head and said, "Don't speak unless I ask you to." He wasn't joking. He repeated that instruction in front of his chef. Amarachi was confused but smiled anyway. The next morning, she greeted the driver in Igbo. Raymond snapped. "This is Lagos, not the village. Speak English. Are you trying to embarrass me?" That evening, he threw away her old clothes and ordered new ones, tight-fitting gowns, and shoes she couldn't walk in. Amarachi began to shrink inside herself. Every mistake she made was punished with mockery. Once she asked for air fresh instead of air freshener, and Raymond laughed so hard he spat out his drink. When guests visited, she was told to hide upstairs. "I don't want you sounding like a roadside tomato seller in front of my friends," he said, without remorse. Amarachi's home became a cage. The luxury that once dazzled her now suffocated her. The walls were wide, but the ridicule echoed louder. She no longer recognized her reflection. Only the ache behind her eyes remained familiar. The worst part wasn't the silence, it was believing she deserved it. She began to believe maybe she really was a bush girl, a charity project, a toy, as Raymond so often called her. She would try to pronounce words in front of the mirror and cry when she failed. Her confidence, already fragile, withered completely. Raymond didn't beat her, but his words bruised her harder than fists. "You're lucky I married you. No one else would tolerate your kind of illiteracy." She tried to sit beside him one evening while he watched the news, and he waved her off like a housefly. "Jessica is coming," he said. "I don't want her to think I'm still entertaining you." That was the night Amarachi knew this was no longer a marriage. It was mockery disguised as matrimony, and she was the unwilling clown in a stage play she never auditioned for. Jessica arrived not as a guest, but as an invader, with red lipstick and high heels that clicked through the marble halls like gunshots. She was younger, bolder, fluent, and cruel. Raymond introduced her to the household as his corporate assistant, but no one needed a dictionary to know what she really was. Amarachi watched as Jessica walked into her bedroom with confidence, threw her old pillows into a black nylon bag, and replaced the curtains with silk. No one asked Amarachi. No one consulted her. Her wedding photos were removed. Her scent was wiped off the room like dirt. That night, Raymond came in to sleep beside Jessica, and Amarachi was told to move to the guest room downstairs. She obeyed, not out of weakness, but because something deeper had died in her. She lay on the narrow guest bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it circled like the thoughts in her head. "This is my life now," she whispered. "This is what I've become." The house staff began to treat her differently. The maids now giggled behind her back. The driver greeted her with a forced nod, clearly confused who the real madam was. Jessica walked around in Amarachi's old wedding robe, sipping wine and humming music from a foreign playlist. Amarachi tried to speak to Raymond, tried to ask if she had done something wrong. But he waved her off like she was a stain. "Don't stress me," he said. "Be grateful I still let you stay here. Jessica is the kind of woman I should have married. You were just a pit stop, a learning experience." Amarachi stood there, stunned, but he was already walking away. That weekend, during a wine tasting event at the house, Jessica spilled red wine on the carpet. She grabbed Amarachi's old wedding dress from the laundry basket and used it to wipe the floor. The guests laughed. No one stopped her. Amarachi watched from the stairs. She didn't cry. Not that night. The tears were too tired to come. She just bit her lip until it bled and turned back to the darkness of her borrowed room. But pain has a way of planting something deeper than anger. It plants purpose. Amarachi began to observe silently. She noticed how Jessica spoke, confidently, fluently. She listened to how Raymond's guests carried themselves, what words they used. She started using her daughter's school books to teach herself grammar. At night, while others slept, she whispered English words under her breath, writing them down phonetically in an old notebook she found. Her daughter, curious, joined her sometimes. They practiced together, two broken girls teaching each other how to pronounce opportunity. Amarachi knew now. They had humiliated her because they believed she was too ignorant to rise. What they didn't know was that humiliation was fuel, and that same fuel, slowly and quietly, was beginning to boil. If Amarachi ever needed a reason to fight, she found it in the quiet tears of her daughter. The little girl, barely 6, had begun asking questions no child should ever ask. Why does Daddy love Auntie Jessica more than you? Why do they laugh when you talk? Mummy, are you not beautiful too? Amarachi couldn't answer those questions without choking on the weight in her chest. She would smile and say, "Don't worry, baby. One day you'll understand." But children understand more than we think. Her daughter noticed how Raymond ignored them at breakfast, how Jessica slammed doors and called her mother names like bush thing, dusty relic, and illiterate embarrassment. She saw her mother cry into a pillow and pretend it was sleep. She saw her mother rehearse words like ambition and elevation while washing clothes. Amarachi's pain became her daughter's pain, but it also became her motivation. One evening, as Amarachi helped her daughter with spelling homework, the girl looked up and said, "Mummy, don't worry. When I grow up, I'll teach you everything, so you can speak like the women on TV." That sentence broke something inside Amarachi and rebuilt something else. That night, she whispered a vow while holding her daughter close. "I may never have a degree. I may never speak as well as Jessica, but I will rise. For you, I will become what I was told I could never be." She began to practice harder, watching YouTube videos with auto caption, recording herself and replaying the grammar mistakes. She turned off the TV and turned on her determination. Her daughter, seated beside her with a plastic tablet, mimicked her mother's pronunciations. They became classmates in survival. Day by day, Amarachi began to grow. She taught herself how to register an email. She followed fashion vendors online and studied how they sold. She started designing her own head wraps using leftover fabrics from old dresses. Her first customer was the gate man's wife, then the cleaner, then a neighbor's sister. Her daughter helped her take photos, learned how to upload them, even created a name for the brand, Ama Designs. Nobody in the mansion knew. Not Raymond, not Jessica. It was just Amarachi, her daughter, and a quiet determination growing in the shadow of shame. The world saw a toy. What it didn't see was the storm quietly forming behind her silence. And when it came, it would not knock, it would break the door. Amarachi had never known the smell of a university classroom or the feel of a graduation gown on her skin, but what she had now was a hunger deeper than degrees. It began with her daughter's primary school textbooks. While cleaning her room one day, she picked up an English comprehension book and saw a sentence about a girl who grew up poor but became a leader. Something in her paused. That night, when the mansion was dark and Raymond was asleep in Jessica's arms, Amarachi crept into the kitchen with a small candle and opened the book again. She stumbled through every word, whispering, repeating, correcting herself until her tongue no longer tripped. The next day, she asked the housemaid, a university student, how to use voice-to-text on a mobile phone. The girl laughed but showed her. That feature changed everything. Amarachi began listening to podcasts, repeating motivational phrases, and recording herself as she tried to mimic what she heard. She didn't stop there. Using her daughter's phone, she created a secret email account. She discovered websites that taught free English and business basics. She downloaded PDFs and listened to pronunciation apps, biting her tongue through every syllable. Amarachi would take long bathroom breaks just to hide and practice words like entrepreneur, client retention, and brand identity. It was hard, embarrassing, slow, but each word mastered was a victory. She soon began using Instagram to follow Nigerian fashion entrepreneurs and women in tech. She watched their videos and read their captions, often copying entire write-ups to analyze sentence structure. She even learned how to use Canva to design simple flyers, although she had no business yet to advertise. The maids often teased her behind closed doors, saying, "Madam Day learned big grammar. Now go employ her." But Amarachi didn't care. Their ridicule sounded exactly like the laughter she heard from her siblings before they left her behind. And she had no intention of being left behind again. As her vocabulary grew, so did her ideas. She remembered how customers in the village used to admire the wrappers she tied and the custom headbands she'd made from leftover cloth. An idea struck her like lightning. Why not build something around that? Something small. Something hers. She gathered old wrappers, some donated by the kitchen staff, who thought she was preparing for a funeral, and began creating headbands, small purses, and customized wraps with beads. Her daughter helped take photos using the housemaid's borrowed phone camera. She named the Instagram page Ama Designs, simple, short, and hers. Within a week, they made their first sale, a beaded wrapper and headband combo to a woman in a koi. Amarachi was stunned. She danced in the guest room with her daughter that night, whispering, "We sold something, baby. Somebody paid us." For the first time in years, she saw a light that didn't come from a chandelier, but from her own hand. Amarachi's phone rang one dusty Tuesday afternoon while she was stitching a velvet Ankara purse. It was a number she hadn't saved in years, her younger brother, Chika. She stared at the screen in disbelief. It rang again. Her hand trembled slightly before she picked up. "Sister Amarachi." His voice started with artificial warmth. "Long time I've missed you. How's Lagos life?" She knew that tone. It wasn't love, it was need. He had found out, perhaps from a mutual cousin, that she was doing business in Lagos. Before she could even reply, he launched into his request. He was trying to apply for a real estate contract and needed someone to stand as guarantor. Amarachi listened quietly as he begged her to talk to Raymond on his behalf, praising her strength, her kindness, pretending like the years of silence had never happened. She said she would think about it. But as soon as the call ended, she cried, not because of him, but because of how easily people remembered her when they needed something. Days later, her younger sister Ifioma reached out too. This time it was for a loan. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious," Ifioma wrote in a long message, followed by heart emojis and guilt-drenched sentences like, "We're still family now." Amarachi read it all in silence. This was the same sister who hadn't sent a text during their mother's funeral. The same sister who told others Amarachi was lucky to be married to a rich man and had no reason to complain. Amarachi didn't refuse. She sent the money quietly, no questions asked. But in her journal, she wrote their names down, not out of hatred, but as a reminder of who they were when she had nothing. She was no longer the girl who begged. She was the woman who remembered. She didn't confront them. She didn't block their numbers. She simply watched, calm and unmoved. Her business continued to grow in the shadows. Word spread online. Her designs began appearing in TikTok reels and Instagram videos. She started receiving bulk orders. To avoid suspicion, she used a delivery service that picked up items from a third-party location outside the estate. Not even Raymond suspected she was earning an income. Jessica once mocked her while she walked past with a bag of fabric. "I hope you're not starting some bush tailoring nonsense," she said, laughing. Amarachi smiled and responded softly, "I like small things. They grow big." Jessica rolled her eyes and walked away, unaware she was watching the rise of the very woman she thought she'd buried. Every insult, every reminder of her past, every silence from her siblings, it all became wood in the fire Amarachi was building quietly. And soon it would burn down everything they thought they controlled. Amarachi stood inside a dingy cybercafe one humid afternoon, her hands shaking slightly as she typed in her business name, Ama Designs and Concepts. The cafe attendant looked at her twice, surprised she could use the keyboard. But Amarachi had been practicing. Every night after her daughter slept, she typed practice emails on an old tablet and memorized layouts. Today, she had come to register her business officially, under her daughter's name, for now, since she didn't want Raymond tracking anything back to her. The registration form felt like a certificate of dignity. She signed it with trembling fingers, whispered a silent prayer, and walked out into the blazing sun feeling like she had just claimed her first breath in a new life. That evening, she returned to the mansion unnoticed. No one cared where she had gone. Raymond was away on a business trip, and Jessica was busy recording a TikTok video in the living room. Amarachi slipped into her room, pulled out her file, and kissed the papers. Her name was now on something real. The first few weeks after registration were difficult. She struggled to balance the mansion duties with packaging orders. She'd wake up early, iron Jessica's clothes, serve breakfast, then run back to stitch bags and label fabrics before the delivery man arrived. Sometimes her fingers bled from the sewing. Sometimes her eyes burned from staring at her cracked phone screen while editing photos. But she didn't stop. Her daughter started helping more, learning how to manage the business page and track feedback. They created a routine, code words, signals, secret labels. Amarachi smiled every time she got a new order notification. The money wasn't much at first, but it was hers. She used part of the profit to buy her daughter better shoes, another part to purchase better fabric. And one day, she invested in a small label printer that gave her designs a professional look. No one in the mansion noticed the change in her confidence, but it was happening quietly, like a tree growing in dry season. Then came the big break. A local influencer who had bought one of Amarachi's head wraps, without knowing its origin, posted a photo, tagging the business. Orders poured in. The page gained over 3,000 followers overnight. Her stock was wiped out in 3 days. Amarachi sat on the bathroom floor, overwhelmed, clutching her daughter with joy. They didn't sleep that night, they planned. They drew sketches, created new pieces, even designed a logo. Amarachi had never felt so alive. The same woman who was once mocked for mispronouncing marketing was now building a brand. A real one, without Raymond, without her siblings, without anyone's pity. And though no one in that mansion knew it yet, Amma Designs was the beginning of a revolution. One that would knock. It would kick the doors down. The grand dining room was dressed in silver and gold, a celebration of excess and ego. Raymond had invited some of his closest business associates, big men in real estate, oil, and entertainment. The table stretched wide like a conference of kings, and seated at one end was Amarachi, dressed in the gown Jessica discarded a week earlier. She had been forced to attend this one because a guest had specifically asked to meet the wife. Raymond didn't want to say yes, but saving face came first. So there she was, a silent ornament among wolves. The conversation roared in high grammar and economic buzzwords she had only recently begun to study. Amarachi smiled gently, nodded where she didn't understand, and kept her hands folded in her lap. Then one of the men turned to her and asked with genuine curiosity, "So, Madam Amarachi, what are your thoughts on wealth redistribution in modern African states?" She froze, her heart pounding. She opened her mouth and managed a nervous reply, stumbling over the word redistribution, calling it redistribution. The table burst into laughter. Raymond, drunk on wine and pride, wiped a tear from his eye as he laughed the loudest. "My people forgive her. She's still learning big grammar. We plucked her from the bush, and she's still growing leaves." Jessica cackled, raising her glass like it was an award. Amarachi sat there, burning with shame. Her cheeks flushed, her hands trembled, but her face remained calm. The laughter felt like thunder, shaking the ground beneath her feet. For a brief second, she wanted to disappear. But then something clicked inside her. She looked around that table, at their expensive suits, fake smiles, and arrogance, and realized something. They weren't mocking her because she was weak. They were mocking her because they feared she might one day speak with their same confidence. Because if someone like her ever found her voice, their hierarchy would crack. Amarachi didn't say another word that night. She just took mental notes of every face, every insult, every giggle. Later that night, while Jessica filmed herself dancing for TikTok in the living room, Amarachi sat in her small room with her daughter asleep beside her and replayed the laughter in her mind. Instead of breaking her, it sharpened her. She downloaded pronunciation apps, watched TED Talks with subtitles, and practiced how to introduce herself properly. Every insult was a lesson plan. Every humiliation became a module. She began repeating difficult words for 30 minutes daily, testing herself, failing, repeating, learning. She even started mimicking Jessica's voice when no one was home, just to master tone and confidence. Her daughter joined in, creating little lesson tests with stickers. Amarachi turned mockery into motivation. And though Raymond and his friends thought they had ridiculed her into silence, what they had done, without knowing, was awaken the storm in her tongue. She didn't want to sound like them. She wanted to sound like herself, confident, clear, and unstoppable. From the outside, Amarachi still looked like the same housewife who washed Jessica's underwear and cooked Raymond's meals. But inside, she had become a furnace of resilience, and every passing day added to her flame. While Jessica paraded around the house, planning her next soft life vacation, and Raymond obsessed over a land deal in Lekki, Amarachi built something real. She ordered fabric in bulk now, disguising the delivery as kitchen supplies. The housemaid helped her unknowingly by signing packages without question. Her daughter, now her unofficial business assistant, had memorized 5 clients' names and helped with organizing products. Together, they worked late into the night. One sewing, one packing, both dreaming. Amarachi even learned to create automated responses for customer inquiries and began offering limited edition collections. Ama Designs was no longer a secret hustle. It was a brand in the making. Word of her products spread like wildfire. Customers loved how original her pieces were, rooted in culture, yet styled with modern flair. Influencers began tagging her without even being paid. A stylist for a Yoruba actress ordered 10 matching head wraps for a photo shoot and paid extra for fast delivery. Amarachi couldn't believe it. Each transfer that hit her business account felt like a breath of validation. For years, she had only known dependence, waiting for Raymond's crumbs, surviving on emotional charity. Now, her work fed others. She hired 2 women in a local tailoring shop to help her fulfill orders. She didn't tell them who she was or where she lived. She just paid well and asked for quality. They respected her professionalism. Nobody saw the quiet empire she was building, but it was there, hiding behind her modest smile and calloused fingers. Amarachi had now saved enough to open a small studio space in the outskirts of Surulere under a business partner's name. She furnished it modestly, just a sewing machine, a chair, a table, and dignity. Every bolt of fabric stacked on that shelf felt like a war medal. Her voice changed too. She spoke with more control. She now read contracts before signing them. She even corrected a delivery man's grammar once and didn't flinch. And yet, inside the mansion, nothing changed. Raymond still mocked her in front of guests. Jessica still rolled her eyes when Amarachi passed. They saw her as stagnant because she didn't argue or dress up or scream. But Amarachi had outgrown the need to be seen. She was no longer searching for their respect. She was building something deeper, respect for herself. The storm was still silent, but it was growing wings. Raymond's ego had swelled beyond redemption, and his arrogance was now public property. After securing a temporary deal with a foreign investor, he decided to host the most elaborate dinner party of his career. The mansion was lit from gate to garden, chandeliers sparkled like diamonds, and uniformed waiters served imported wine. Jessica, clothed in a designer gown that Amarachi once ironed for her, greeted guests like she was the first lady. Amarachi had been deliberately uninvited, but she didn't mind. She had a better plan. That evening, as she sat in her small room brushing her daughter's hair, she received a message from a former client. Her business had been nominated for a local entrepreneur spotlight in an upcoming magazine. The photo they'd chosen showed her holding her daughter and a handmade bag with the Ama Designs label in full view. Amarachi smiled, kissed her daughter's forehead, and said, "We've already won." Downstairs, the dinner party was in full swing. Powerful men laughed. Influencers snapped pictures. Cameras rolled. Raymond stood before the crowd, his wine glass raised. "To new beginnings," he said, voice booming, "and to leaving behind the shadows of our past." The crowd applauded. He continued, "Let me be honest with you. Some of us made mistakes. Some of us married out of pity. You know, bush girls. Toys. But thank God we've upgraded. Thank God for women like Jessica, elegant, educated, and expensive." The laughter was thunderous. Guests turned their heads to Jessica, who curtsied proudly. A few looked around for Amarachi, but she was nowhere in sight. Raymond, enjoying the spotlight, added one final jab. As for my wife, don't worry about her. She's just my toy. I keep her like people keep old newspaper. Just for memory. But before the laughter could settle, the main doors opened with a slow creak. Heads turned. And there she was, Amarachi, dressed in a flowing emerald green gown, her hair wrapped like a queen, makeup soft, lips firm, posture unbending. Silence fell like a blade. Even the music paused. Raymond's wine glass trembled. Jessica's smirk disappeared. Amarachi stepped into the room, each heel strike echoing louder than the last. She walked to the center of the hall, stood before the screen, and said in clear, flawless English, "Good evening, everyone. My name is Amarachi. I was mocked as a toy. But tonight, I'll show you what that toy has built." Then, with the flick of a remote, she turned on the projector. And what the guests saw next would turn that dinner party into Raymond's public funeral. The projector screen flickered to life as guests turned their eyes from Amarachi to the unfolding images in disbelief. What they expected to be a dramatic outburst or emotional confrontation became something else entirely, calculated, powerful, and devastating. The screen displayed the Ama Designs logo, sleek and professional. A brief video montage followed. Celebrity influencers modeling her head wraps, magazine clips featuring the brand, and customer reviews praising her creativity and professionalism. Amarachi stood tall at the center of the room, not raising her voice, but commanding absolute silence. Then came her voiceover, played in crisp, well-pronounced English. They called me a toy. But while they laughed, I was building. While they mocked, I was mastering. While they ignored me, I was designing an empire. The guests turned to each other in confusion. Whispers broke out. One man at the table whispered, "She owns Ama Designs?" Another muttered, "But I've bought her products." Amarachi didn't blink. She waited until the screen faded to black before taking one step forward. "I built a brand in silence, with my daughter beside me, with my dignity intact, and without a single naira from Raymond." Jessica's mouth fell open, trembling with rage. Raymond tried to recover with a forced chuckle. "Amarachi, this isn't the place," she cut him off, turning calmly toward the crowd. "Actually, this is the perfect place," she said, lifting a leather file she had tucked under her arm. "Since this is the same audience that laughed when I was mocked as a toy, the same people who clapped when I was introduced as village property, I thought you'd all like to know the full story." She opened the file and pulled out certified documents. "This is the CAC registration, showing me as legal co-founder of Raymond's company. He used my name to file taxes and register deals. These," she held up more papers, "are property documents signed in my name. I was never told, but I kept copies." The silence grew deafening. Investors began murmuring. A man from the foreign delegation raised his brows, visibly agitated. "Are you saying these business deals were filed fraudulently?" he asked. Amarachi nodded once. "Under my name, without my knowledge. That's financial fraud." The atmosphere in the hall shifted violently. Journalists who had been invited for publicity began rolling their cameras again. This wasn't just a dinner anymore. It was a takedown. Raymond's face turned ashen. Jessica backed away slowly, clutching her handbag. Amarachi continued with chilling grace. "I have filed official reports. A legal team has picked up the matter. All contracts under my name are currently under review. I was the invisible hand he used to manipulate his way into wealth. And now that same hand is pulling the curtain." Some guests began to rise from their seats, clearly uncomfortable. One man gathered his files and left. The party had transformed into a scandal. And standing at the eye of that storm was Amarachi, no longer the mocked wife, no longer the bush girl. She had just become the voice that shattered the glass house they thought was impenetrable. Amarachi's documents were not vague. They were meticulous. She had every transaction, every document Raymond ever signed using her legal identity. He had underestimated her so deeply that he never thought she'd even learn how to read, let alone uncover legal loopholes. But Amarachi had spent nights studying property law, asking anonymous questions online, and even walking into a law firm once pretending to be a student researching a thesis. What she discovered shocked her. Several key real estate acquisitions were filed under her name due to a past tax scheme Raymond used to avoid detection. He believed she was too ignorant to know. He was wrong. And now, as she handed copies of those documents to a representative from the Board of Internal Revenue, who had also been invited to the party, Raymond's downfall began to move faster than anyone expected. Jessica stood off to the side, trembling. Her eyes darted between Raymond and the guests who now regarded her not as a soft-life queen, but as a leech attached to a sinking ship. She tried to speak, but Amarachi beat her to it. "You, Jessica," she said, turning gracefully. "You wore my robe, slept in my bed, and used my wedding gown to wipe wine. But it's funny how you never noticed the woman whose place you thought you took was actually the legal spine of everything you admired." Gasps filled the room. Jessica stepped backward, whispering curses under her breath. "I'll sue you for defamation," she snapped. Amarachi smiled. "You'll need to define it first." Laughter erupted, not mocking Amarachi this time, but celebrating her. One woman near the front clapped slowly, followed by another. It wasn't pity. It was awe. Raymond, disoriented, tried one last stand. "You think this will ruin me? You think I'll let you do this?" he barked. But his voice had lost its grip. Amarachi turned to him and said in fluent English, her accent soft but firm, "This isn't revenge. This is revelation. And you didn't let me do anything. You did it yourself." At that moment, a bailiff entered the hall, accompanied by two men in plain clothes. They handed Raymond a sealed document. "You are summoned to appear in court in 7 days regarding these claims," the man said. Raymond snatched the document and ripped it open, his eyes darting. When he looked up, Amarachi had already turned away. The guests parted for her like royalty. Cameras followed. And as she stepped outside into the Lagos night, her daughter ran up to her, wrapping tiny arms around her waist. Amarachi looked down and whispered, "The storm has landed, baby, and it's wearing heels." Outside the mansion, in the dim glow of the garden lights, Amarachi knelt before her daughter, taking her hands gently. The little girl looked up with wide eyes full of questions and pride. "Mummy, why were they clapping for you?" she asked. Amarachi smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks, not of sadness, but relief. "Because I finally stopped hiding," she replied. "Because I finally showed them who I really am." She stood up, holding her daughter close, breathing in the soft scent of hope. For years, she had protected this child from the storm inside their home, shielding her from the bruises of mockery and disrespect. And now, that same daughter had watched her mother become the kind of woman that even giants bowed to. The mansion behind them was no longer a prison. It was a crumbling ruin of lies, and Amarachi was walking away from it without fear. Inside, the party had turned into a scramble. Raymond was shouting at his assistant. Jessica had locked herself in the guest bathroom, and the investors were exchanging furious conversations about due diligence and legal exposure. But none of it mattered anymore. The woman they all dismissed as irrelevant had become the architect of their undoing. And yet, Amarachi didn't scream. She didn't gloat. She didn't dance on the ashes. She simply walked her daughter toward the waiting car, driven by a woman she had recently hired from the tailoring shop, another single mother trying to survive. Amarachi believed in helping the forgotten, because she knew how it felt to be erased. As they drove off, her daughter leaned against her and whispered, "You're the strongest mummy in the world." Amarachi held her close and whispered back, "No, I'm just the quietest one they underestimated." That night, at home, Amarachi placed her daughter on the bed, brushed her hair gently, and tucked her in. Then she sat by the window, watching the moonlight reflect off the growing stack of orders she still had to fulfill. She thought about her siblings, how they ignored her, how they abandoned her. She thought about her younger self, kneeling by her mother's body, with no one to help. She thought about the nights she bit her tongue to stop herself from screaming. And then she looked at the certificate hanging beside her. CEO, Ama Designs and Concepts. She had done what they said was impossible. She had turned mockery into a mission, pain into power. As her daughter slept peacefully beside her, Amarachi whispered one final vow. For every woman silenced by shame, I'll be your voice. For every child watching her mother suffer, I'll be your storm. The morning after Amarachi's revelation, the newspapers lit up like firewood soaked in petrol. Wife exposes billionaire husband at dinner party. Ama Design's CEO revealed as mocked wife. Fraud allegations rock Raymond Atkins' empire. Every headline carved deeper into Raymond's already fractured reputation. Within 24 hours, major stakeholders in his Lecky project began pulling out. Bank accounts were flagged, assets frozen, and properties placed under scrutiny. Calls that once came from foreign partners now went unanswered. The same business partners who clapped when Raymond mocked Amarachi were now pretending they didn't know him. What began as laughter at a dinner party had morphed into a corporate bloodbath. And as the empire he built on deception crumbled, the man at its center was unraveling. Raymond stayed locked in his study, chain smoking and yelling at assistants who were already handing in resignations. The house, once noisy with arrogance, had become eerily silent. Jessica, whose confidence once filled entire rooms, had vanished. The morning after the dinner party, she packed her things into a black SUV and left without so much as a goodbye. She didn't answer Raymond's calls, and she didn't respond to the blogs that tagged her in scandal after scandal. She was never loyal to him, only to the image he provided. And now that the image was shattered, she wanted no part in sweeping the glass. Raymond was alone. Even the staff had grown cold. They no longer feared him. Some whispered behind his back. Others stole food from the fridge. And in the very room where he had once laughed about Amarachi's village accent, he now sat disoriented, watching online videos of her being praised by business analysts and women empowerment panels. Amarachi's face, dignified, elegant, calm, was everywhere. Her name had become the voice of resilience. She had gone from ghost to giant. Meanwhile, Amarachi watched the chaos from a distance. She didn't gloat, didn't dance, didn't tweet a single word. Her silence was intentional. She wasn't interested in trending. She was interested in justice and peace. As Raymond's downfall unfolded, she focused on expansion. Ama Designs opened its first mini studio in Surulere with 2 full-time staff. Her daughter began attending a private school with her fees paid up front for 3 years. Amarachi gave back to the same women who once bought her beaded wrappers on credit, offering them job training and startup funding. She had grown beyond revenge. The storm had passed, but the wreckage it left behind would remain as a warning. Never mock the woman who is learning in silence. Never laugh at the one whose eyes are always watching. Amarachi had rewritten her story, and in doing so, she had destroyed a kingdom that was never built on love, but on mockery. They came one by one, not with confidence, but with trembling knees and dry throats. Her siblings, those who once ignored her calls, dismissed her sacrifices, and vanished during their mother's funeral, were now standing at the gates of her new compound in Surulere. The house was not a mansion, but it radiated dignity. Neat garden, clean tiles. The brass nameplate read, Ama Designs Headquarters, Home Office. Chica, her brother who had once told her he was not her bank, now stood clutching a nylon folder filled with CVs. Sister Amarachi, he began, voice shaking. I've been applying for jobs everywhere. Please, I heard you're hiring. She opened the gates slowly, didn't speak, just looked at him. Then Ifioma, her younger sister, stepped forward too. We're sorry, she said, already crying. We didn't know. We were wrong. Amarachi didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just stepped aside and said, come in. Inside, she sat them down and served them the same rice and stew she once cooked when their mother was sick, and they pretended not to hear. She listened to their apologies, not because she needed them, but because they needed to speak. Chica explained how his business crashed. Ifioma said she was struggling with debts. Amarachi nodded. Then she reached into a file and brought out 2 contract agreements. I'll give you work, she said, but not as siblings, on merit, with conditions. You'll report to my operations manager. You'll earn like everyone else. You'll be disciplined if you fail. They agreed quickly. thinking she had forgiven everything. But Amarachi's heart had changed. She had released the pain, but not the memory. "I'm helping you," she said. "But I'll never forget who I called when Mama was dying and who answered." Her voice didn't shake. It landed like judgment masked in grace. They left that day with jobs and lowered heads. The same Amarachi who once slept hungry so they could eat was now the one signing their paycheck. Yet she didn't gloat. She didn't boast to the neighbors. Instead, she returned to her studio, rolled out new fabric, and began sewing. Her daughter stood by the door, watching. "Mummy," she asked, "did you forgive them?" Amarachi paused, smiled faintly, and replied, "I didn't forgive them to make them feel better. I forgave them so I wouldn't carry bitterness into my new life." Her daughter nodded, not fully understanding, but sensing the strength in her mother's voice. Amarachi didn't believe in burning bridges, but she believed in toll gates. If her siblings wanted access to her world now, they'd have to pay in integrity and humility. No more emotional debts. No more guilt-ridden bonds. The woman who once begged for their love was now the one teaching them how to love with accountability. It was raining the day Raymond returned. The clouds hung low over the city like they were ashamed of what the world had become. Amarachi sat in her office, her daughter beside her drawing sketches for a children's line they were planning. A knock came at the gate, soft at first, then more frantic. The security guard opened it and stood there, stunned. There stood Raymond, once dressed in fine Italian suits, now in a faded shirt and slippers worn to the heel. His eyes were hollow, beard unshaven, and pride completely stripped away. He didn't bring a car. He didn't bring a driver. Just himself and a plastic bag with what looked like legal papers. The security guard walked in hesitantly. "Madam," he said, "you have a visitor. It's him." Amarachi didn't flinch. She rose calmly and walked outside, her daughter peeking from the curtains. When she stepped into the compound, she saw him, so small now, so broken, so human. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Raymond dropped to his knees immediately, in the mud. "Amarachi, please," he whispered, voice cracking. "I have nothing. They've taken everything. Jessica left. The company is gone. I have no house, no one. I've been sleeping in my friend's BQ. Please. I know I don't deserve it, but help me." Amarachi looked at him without anger. Just silence. She remembered every insult, every laughter, every time he silenced her in front of others, every moment she stood alone while he walked proudly with a woman who mocked her. And yet she didn't shout. She didn't mock him back. She simply whispered, "You called me a toy, but you never knew I was the storm." He cried, weeping into the muddy ground. "Forgive me," he sobbed. "I'm begging you." She turned to the guard. "Give him food," she said. "Let him sit under the porch, but not inside my home." The guard obeyed. She walked away without looking back. Inside, her daughter looked up. "Was that Daddy?" Amarachi nodded. "Yes, it was." "Did you help him?" the little girl asked. Amarachi took a deep breath. "I gave him what he needs, but not what he lost." Her voice was firm, but there was no hatred in it. Just wisdom. Raymond sat outside for hours, watching the windows of the house that used to be his fortress. The home where he once laughed at Amarachi now sheltered a woman he could no longer reach. And as the rain washed over his head, he finally understood what he had thrown away. Not just a wife, but a warrior. Not just a quiet girl, but the storm that he thought would never rise. The market hadn't changed much. Same shouting traders, same rusted roofs, same dusty air clinging to the roadside corn sellers. Amarachi walked through it, wearing a simple Ankara dress and flat slippers. No bodyguards, no entourage. Just her and her daughter beside her, carrying a small notebook filled with sketches. People recognized her now. Some greeted her with "Good morning, Ma." Others whispered as she passed, "That's the woman we saw on TV, the one whose husband mocked her." But Amarachi smiled at everyone with the same humility that once earned her silence. She passed the same stall she once sold Gary from. The seller didn't recognize her until she doubled back, picked up 5 cups of beans, and paid in full without bargaining. "Madam," the woman exclaimed, Are you not? Amarachi simply said, I used to sell next to you. You once gave me your umbrella when I fainted under the sun. The woman gasped, overwhelmed. You remember? Amarachi nodded. I remember everything. That's what kept me alive. She moved further into the market and found a girl, maybe 19, hunched beside a torn umbrella, struggling to sell slippers no one was buying. Her eyes were tired. Her blouse had holes. She reminded Amarachi of herself. She bought 3 pairs of slippers, none of which she needed, and crouched down. What do you want to do with your life? She asked the girl. The girl hesitated, unsure how to answer. I used to want to learn tailoring, she said softly. Amarachi smiled, pulled out a card from her bag, and handed it to her. This is my office. Come on Monday. Tell them you met me in the market. You'll start learning, and I'll pay for your transport and lunch. The girl wept instantly, falling at her feet. Traders began gathering, applauding, not out of show, but shock. She helped strangers, one murmured. She no forget where she come from, another said. Amarachi helped the girl up and said, no one claps for the quiet ones until they become storms. As they left the market, her daughter tugged her hand. Mummy, why did you help that girl? Amarachi looked down, her eyes glassy. Because I see myself in her. And no one helped me when I was her age. Sometimes, the people we help don't need our money. They just need proof that someone still sees them. Her daughter hugged her tightly. Then, I want to be just like you. Amarachi knelt and kissed her forehead. No, she whispered. I want you to be better. That night, as they prepared dinner, her daughter insisted on serving Amarachi's plate. You're the queen of the house, she said proudly. Amarachi laughed through soft tears. In a world where no one clapped for her when she was silent, her daughter's love was the loudest ovation of all. The auditorium was filled to capacity. Women of all ages, students, single mothers, entrepreneurs, and even business leaders gathered for the Women Rising Summit. Amarachi hadn't planned to speak, but the organizers insisted after her story went viral. She wore a modest white dress with her signature head wrap. She stood behind the podium, glanced at her daughter in the front row, and took a deep breath. Her voice was calm, deliberate, clear. Years ago, I couldn't pronounce simple English words, she began. People laughed. My husband called me a toy. My family abandoned me. I was mocked for how I dressed, how I spoke, how I stayed silent. The room listened like children hearing a bedtime story. But I never stopped believing that there was something bigger waiting inside me. Not for revenge, but for freedom. My silence wasn't weakness, it was power waiting for the right time. She went on to talk about building Amma designs from a corner in a guest room. She spoke about betrayal, loneliness, rejection, and rebuilding herself through self-learning. Every night, I studied English with my daughter. I watched videos. I practiced in secret. When they laughed at my bush accent, I used that same accent to record a business pitch that changed my life. The girl they laughed at became the woman they now invite to speak. Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't stop. I'm here today not because I had money or education or a powerful father. I'm here because I refuse to be defined by other people's ignorance. I turned mockery into motivation. I turned my daughter's questions into fire. And when the time came, I became the storm they never saw coming. When she finished, the hall rose in thunderous applause. Women wept. Some clapped with both hands raised. Others rushed to the stage just to touch her hand. Her daughter ran to her and hugged her tightly, whispering, Mummy, you made them all stand. Amarachi knelt down and whispered back, because I finally stood for myself. The storm she had become was not loud. It was precise. It didn't destroy, it exposed. And in its path, it cleared the way for other women who had once been laughed at, underestimated, ignored. That night, as the stars lit up the Lego sky, Amarachi stood on the balcony of her new home, holding her daughter close. And she knew she had become the woman she once prayed to be. A woman they mocked into destiny. A storm no one believed would rise. Years later, when her daughter grew into a confident, articulate, and fiercely intelligent teenager, she gave a school presentation titled My Hero. The first slide was a photo of Amarachi holding her sewing machine with messy braids and a beaming smile. The last slide was a clip from the summit where she said, "I was their toy, but now I am their lesson." When asked why she chose her mother as her hero, the girl answered, "Because she made silence powerful, because she turned pain into purpose, and because when the storm came, it looked like her." Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.